Hey nerdy knitter, there's more than one way to cast on stitches for your knitting project, and sometimes it's a good idea to know more than one so you can choose the right one for the project. We're going to look at 9 of my favorites today. All of them are perfect even for beginners who are just tackling some of their first projects and want to expand their techniques. And one more fan favorite that I'd never done before, but we're going to tackle in this video. Before we dive in, I just want to say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer. My goal is to help you become a more confident, adventurous knitter. I recently had a poll on the Nerdy Knitting community page where I asked about your favorite cast-on techniques, and these are the results. Now, I couldn't list every single cast-on in that poll, so I chose just a few and then left an option for you to add more ideas as well. Now, the long-tail cast-on was a clear winner, so we'll be looking at that one, but we'll look at some others as well. We'll look at the different characteristics each of these cast-ons has, when you would want to use them, and of course, how to work them. Now, first is the backwards loop cast-on, or the E cast-on. It has lots of different names, but it's a very simple cast-on. Now this cast-on is really loose, so it's not a great choice for the foundation row of your knitting. But it's a perfect choice when you need to cast on extra stitches. Say you're working a sweater and you've put the sleeves on hold and you need to cast on some underarm stitches. This cast-on is perfect for that. The same for a mitten. After you've worked the gusset for the thumb, you put those stitches on hold. You might have to cast on a few stitches. Backwards loop cast-on, perfect for that situation. And you can even use it as an increase in a pinch if you want to.
Start by making a slip knot. I just wrap the yarn on my finger twice and pull the second loop through the first, and that creates the slip knot. And then you're just going to use your thumb to cast on the stitches. The yarn's underneath, your thumb's on top, and you push it down and towards your body to create a loop, and then hook your needle around to insert it to pick up the loop, and just repeat that process. Thumb on top of the yarn, sweep it towards your body, and then insert your needle to catch the loop. And then repeat this process for all of the stitches you want to cast on, -1. That slip knot counts as your first stitch.
Next is the long tail cast on, and there's 2 different ways to work this. The thumb method is actually very similar to the backwards loop cast on. We're just adding our first row of stitches along with that cast on. The long tail cast on is a great all-purpose cast on. It has enough stretch for most projects. Sometimes you might want something a little more stretchy, but it's still a good firm foundation for that first row of knitting. But it can be easy to work this one too tightly, so be careful as you're casting on. And another drawback is that you have to estimate how much yarn you're going to need for the tail. And the 2 sides of the cast on are very different, so you'll have to decide which side will be the right side for your project.
Start with a long tail of yarn and create your slip knot, and the tail of the yarn goes in your left hand and your working yarn goes in your right. And you're going to make that backwards loop cast on like we did in the previous demonstration, but this time you're going to wrap the yarn to create a stitch and pull that loop off our needle instead. We're actually just working a backwards loop and then working our first row of knitting. So you insert, pick up that new stitch just like you're going to knit, wrap it around, but drop that loop off instead of keeping it on your needle. So thumb down and sweep it towards your body, hook your needle in to the loop, wrap the yarn as if to knit, pull that loop off and over that new stitch. And this is how you work the long tail cast on using your thumb. So if you're very familiar with a backwards loop cast on, this version of the long tail cast on is very easy.
And here's my tip for estimating the yarn that you'll need for that cast on so you don't run out of tail while you're working a lot of stitches. I take just a short length and cast on 10 stitches, and then I use that to count out how much yarn I'm going to need for the full amount of stitches to cast on. The second way to cast on for the long tail cast on is with the slingshot method, which is faster than the 2-handed thumb method.
In this version, you hold the yarn like a slingshot. The long tail's over your thumb, the working yarn is over your finger, and you grip the yarn with the rest of your fingers. Swoop down and towards yourself to create your first stitch. And then from this position, you can see that you've got 2 loops of yarn. You come up under your thumb, sweep around and catch the yarn on your finger, and tighten up the thumb yarn to create the stitch. Under the thumb, swoop around to catch the yarn on your finger, back under the thumb yarn and tighten it up. Under the thumb, catch the working yarn in your finger, back through the loop, tighten it up. This is a very quick method. Once you've practiced it, then you'll see how quick and easy this method is.
Then we have the knit cast on. This one is really good for beginners because it's very similar to how the knit stitches worked. Instead of dropping the stitch off the needle though, you're adding stitches, you're casting them onto your needle. Now you can work this one a little loosely and then you've got a loose edge that looks a bit sloppy, so pay careful attention as you're casting on. And sometimes you might even want to go down a needle size just for the cast on and then go back to your regular needle size for the project itself. Now I like to use this cast on when I'm teaching new knitters how to cast on their stitches because it's so similar to the actual knit stitch. And I also like to use it when I have to add stitches at the beginning or end of a row. Say you're working the body of a sweater and then you're adding sleeve stitches, then the knit cast on is a great one for that.
So you'll start with a slip knot on the left needle and you insert your right needle into that stitch, wrap the yarn as if to knit, and pull that new stitch through, but place it on the needle to create a new cast on stitch. And then just leave your needle in there, wrap for the next stitch, pull it through, place it on the needle, and then insert into that cast on stitch, wrap the yarn to knit a new stitch, pull it through and hold them parallel to place that new stitch on the needle. And continue this process until you've cast on all of the stitches that you need.
Another favorite is the cable cast on. Now this is a good all-purpose cast on as well. It has some stretchiness, not as much as a long tail cast on, and it's still nice and stable. It looks really nice. It works for buttonholes or if you want to cast on stitches at the beginning or end of a row.
This cast on starts like the knit cast on with a slip knot on your left needle, and you're going to work a first stitch just like that knit cast on. Wrap a stitch, pull it through, place it on the needle, and then from this point you're going to be inserting your needle between those two stitches to create a new stitch. Wrap the yarn as if to knit, pull it through and hold the needles parallel as you put that new stitch on. And then you repeat the process, going between the new stitch and the stitch before to create more stitches.
Now the next one is the alternate cable cast on. This one is perfect if you want something that looks like an invisible or tubular cast on without doing all that fussy work that you have to do to achieve it, then this is the perfect cast on for that. It gives you that nice, almost invisible edge, perfect for a 1x1 rib.
This begins just like the cable cast on. Insert into that slip knot and put the first stitch on using the knit cast on. But this time we're going to start by inserting from between the two stitches from the other side and purling that new stitch. Wrapping the yarn as if to purl, pulling it through, holding the needles parallel to place it on the needle. That's our purl stitch. Now we're going to do a knit stitch. Insert from the front between those two stitches, knit the stitch, pull it through, place it on the needle, and then we need a purl stitch. So we enter from behind between those two stitches and we purl this stitch. And you repeat this process alternating between the knits and purls until you've cast on all the stitches that you need.
Now the next cast on is taking that alternate cable cast on but changing it just a little to make it work for a 2x2 rib instead. You still end up with that nice, almost invisible edge without the fussiness of a tubular or other invisible cast on. Now, this one can look a little bit wonky when you first start it, so give it a try on a small swatch. And sometimes I think the second side ends up looking nicer, so I try to make that as my right side row.
Now cast on all the stitches using that first alternate cable cast on method, and now we're going to change it just a bit. Knit that first stitch. Now the next stitch on our needle is a purl stitch. We're going to skip it. So we're going to insert our needle into that next knit stitch, slip them off and put that purl stitch on the needle and bring that knit stitch to the front. And we've changed the location so we can knit that one. Now we've got two purls beside each other. So we can purl both of these stitches. And then we're going to have to knit one stitch and then move that next stitch so we can put another knit stitch in its place. So insert into the front leg of the next knit, slide that purl stitch off the needle and slip it over to the left needle, and then the knit stitch. And then you can continue knitting and then purling, and this creates a 2x2 rib.
Then we have the crochet cast on. Now this one is really nice if you want something that matches the basic bind off really well. It's nice and firm and it looks really good. And like I said, it's a perfect match for the basic bind off. And this one's also used for the beginning of a provisional cast on. You would work it in waste yarn before you begin knitting stitches with your regular project yarn.
You'll need a crochet hook for this method. Put your slip knot on your crochet hook and the empty needle in your left, and the yarn should be underneath that knitting needle. You're going to bring the hook over, catch the yarn, and slip it through the slip knot that's on the crochet hook. And then bring the yarn to the back behind the needle again, and bring the crochet hook over the top of the needle to catch the yarn, pull it through that loop that's on the crochet hook. And you can just continue this process. Bring the yarn behind and under the needle, the crochet hook over the needle to catch the yarn, and hook it through the slip knot or the stitch that's on the crochet hook. Continue doing this until you've cast on all but one stitch, and then you'll transfer that final loop from the crochet hook to the knitting needle itself. And this makes a nice chain that looks just like the basic bind off.
Then we have the lace cast on. This one, sort of like working the cable cast on, but it's more decorative and it's very, very stretchy. So it's a great choice when you have to cast on stitches for a lace project and you need that cast on edge to really have a lot of stretch.
So start with a slip knot and then put that stitch with the slip knot in your left hand, just like you're going to do the cable or knit cast on. Grab your empty needle, but instead of doing a knit stitch here first, you're going to wrap the yarn from back to front, sort of like a reverse yarn over. Hold it there and then do sort of a cable cast on method. Insert between that yarn over and that slip knot, make a knit stitch, pull it through, place it on the needle, and then tighten it up, and then you'll do that reverse yarn over technique from back to front again, and then do another cable cast on stitch between that yarn over and the last cast on stitch. Then you just repeat this process across that reverse yarn over, insert between the two to pull through a new stitch and place it on your needle. Repeat this until you've cast on all the stitches you need. You'll have to end with a cable cast on stitch.
Now in that poll I shared at the beginning, a lot of people left a comment that they really liked the German twisted cast on. I had never done that one before, so I had to look into it. What I discovered is that it's actually very similar to the slingshot method of the long tail cast on, but it adds a nice decorative element that's missing from the long tail cast on. So when you want something that's similar to your favorite go-to cast on, but a little more decorative, then try this German twisted cast on.
You'll need to start with a long tail of yarn, and then you'll want to put a slip knot on that needle. And then once you've done that, you're going to hold the yarn in that slingshot position with the tail of the yarn over your thumb, the working yarn over your first finger. So carry it over those fingers and then pinch it underneath with your other fingers to keep it in place. And then you get into that slingshot position. You're going to go under both strands on your thumb, then back down between them to the front, catch the yarn on your finger, and then slip it through that loop. You might have to untwist it a little with your thumb. And that is the process. This one takes a little more time to figure out. Under both strands on your thumb, back down through the middle of that towards you, and then sweep around to catch the yarn on your index finger before pulling it through the loop on your thumb. Let's do that again. Under both strands on your thumb, then back down through that loop, sweeping towards your body, and then back around to your finger to catch the yarn, and then bring it through that loop, untwisting it with your thumb. Under both strands, back down through that loop towards your body, and then towards your finger to catch the yarn, untwist that loop, and pull it through. This one's a bit tricky, but it's worth the extra effort for a really pretty cast on.
Now these are some of my go-to cast on methods, and you can see there's lots of times that you might need to switch up your cast on depending on the project and what you're doing. I'd love to hear about your favorite cast on, so please leave me a comment and tell me about it. And if you have a recommendation for a great bind off method, I'd love to hear that as well, because I'd love to do a video about that topic next. Now, if you're looking for more cast on tips and techniques and advice, be sure to go check out those comments to see what other knitters have to say. And I'll see you in the next video.